Hello, and welcome to HHH, the podcast where we talk about horrible humans in history. I am your host, Angela Pearson, and today we are doing another listener request. Thanks again to Sam, one of the best forensic scientists I know. She's amazing. And if you want to hear about anyone specific, feel free to leave a comment on this episode or send me a message on my Instagram account, Horrible Humans in History. I'd love to talk about anybody that you would like to hear about specifically. I've got a couple other listener requests in the queue, but please feel free to send me some messages about what you want to hear about. And today, like I said, it is another listener request, and this is someone that I actually talked a little bit about in my master's degree, but didn't actually hear the details about this individual's life story. I just heard him as a leader and someone in history that you needed to know about. But I didn't know why, and we didn't talk about why. So I'm really excited to dive into why this person is a horrible human in history. But first, make sure you guys are liking, subscribing, and sharing this channel with anyone you know who really likes true crime or even just spooky stories. So let's get into this. Today, we are going to talk about King Leopold II of Belgium. Now, I don't know how many of you have ever heard of him. Probably most of you have not heard of him because I didn't hear about him until I was in my master's program. But this man has been able to pull off one of the biggest lies in history and has been able to cover his tracks better than anyone I've ever heard of, ever. So King Leopold II would actually reign over Belgium from 1865 to 1909, and the people of Belgium still love him. They still see him as a great ruler who brought a lot of wealth and glory to their country. They even have golden statues of him displayed around the countryside. I'm telling you, this guy pulled off an incredible lie. And it's taught that King Leopold II was a huge humanitarian, anti-slave trade man who brought Christianity to people in the Congo. But as always happens, the truth eventually came out about how he was able to bring all the wealth to his country, and it would be uncovered, and it would be a dirty, dirty truth. So let's dive into this. Let's talk about King Leopold II and why he is a horrible human in history. King Leopold II was actually born Prince Leopold Louis Philippe Marie Victor on April 9th, 1835 in Brussels, the capital of Belgium. His parents were King Leopold Leopold I, obviously, and Louise Marie of Orleans. They were actually the first royal family of Belgium since the country actually had only existed for 5 years after declaring their independence from the Netherlands. Before gaining their independence, the territory had been conquered by a ton of different countries, including, obviously, the Netherlands, because that's who they gained their independence from, but France, Germany, and Luxembourg. So they had a pretty tumultuous past, but they were a new blossoming country. This is the first royal family, and Leopold II actually had two younger siblings, Philippe and Charlotte. But like many of our horrible humans in history, they didn't have the best family life. Soon after the birth of his sister, Leopold's father actually met a 16-year-old girl named Arcadie Claret, and he would go on to have an affair with this 16-year-old girl, fathering two children with her. Now, at this point in time, I will mention that his father was actually 54 years old, having an affair with this 16-year-old girl. Now, his father had so many affairs, in fact, that they aren't actually sure how many half-siblings Leopold II actually has. So his father was running around cheating on his mother, and his mother wasn't much better. Because she was so miserable in her marriage, she actually would take her anger out and frustration out on her children, especially on Leopold II. She often would make fun of his nose because it resembled his father's nose. She would call him, like he had a beak, like a bird on his face. She would say he was disfigured. And, obviously this probably had a pretty severe impact on his self-esteem. So he was known to be a pretty unruly child and jealous of the favoritism that he saw for his two younger siblings, because his mother didn't treat his two younger siblings as poorly as she treated him. Now, he struggled in school. He did not like studying. And they had studies for 8 hours a day. If you think school is bad now, they had it for 8 hours a day. He really struggled. He couldn't pay attention. He really didn't care about normal studies, but he was really good at drawing, and he really loved discussing politics. And even at the age of 10, he would talk to his father and his father's friends about politics and how, like, strategy and those kinds of things. So he really, really enjoyed politics, but everything else he just wanted nothing to do with. In October of 1850, he was actually at his mother's bedside when she would die of tuberculosis at the age of 38. So his mother was pretty young when she passed away, and his father was devastated at the loss of his wife, ironically, because he had a lot of affairs and a lot of children with those women. But he was devastated and really struggled building an emotional connection with his children, especially Leopold after her death. He mostly talked to his son through messages that were sent via courier. He wouldn't have face-to-face conversations with him anymore. So in 1853, just a couple years after his mother's death, at the age of 18, Leopold was forced into an arranged marriage with Marie Henrietta of Austria. Since he didn't really have a great example of a really happy, healthy marriage, the two were super awkward around each other, to the point people would tease them and call them a nun and a stable boy because they just did not know how to behave around each other. It was incredibly awkward. His parents failed in a few different ways, but in one particular way, they failed to teach their son about the birds and the bees. So him and his wife had not successfully consummated their marriage. So he actually had to get advice from his aunt, who happened to be Queen Victoria of England. Now, just imagine getting advice on your intimate relations from the Queen of England. I don't know about you, but that would be incredibly awkward. So he had to get advice from his aunt, but the advice must have worked because eventually Leopold and Henrietta had 2 daughters of their own. So they did figure it out thanks to the help of Queen Victoria. So as a young couple, they actually traveled quite a bit. So they went to a ton of different countries, met with a ton of different leaders of these countries, but they settled in Egypt for a couple of years because of health issues that Leopold was facing. And the doctors recommended staying in Egypt for a little bit to revive his health. Well, while in Egypt, this is when he started to get the idea of establishing a Belgium territory in Egypt. But if he wasn't able to do it somewhere in Egypt, he wanted to do it somewhere in Africa. So this really started to stew in his brain and really fester. And eventually it would become kind of an obsession for him to have a territory down in Africa, which obviously, dun dun dun, spoiler alert, affects his future and a lot of other people's futures quite heavily. So on December 10th of 1865, his father actually passed away. So at the age of 30, he took over the rule of Belgium as the king. As many unhappy people do, Leopold actually tried to find happiness in things. He really liked stuff and owning property, and he felt like the more he gathered things, the more he would be happy. So he got happiness out of owning things. Again, just like the idea of owning a territory in Africa, this would play a pretty big role in his future life. To the Chancellor of Germany, he actually said, "There's really nothing left for us kings except money." He really loved having money and wealth and stuff. Now, back in this time period, conquering colonies and expanding your empire was what most of the world powers were doing. That's how you showed your predominance. That's how you showed your power, by conquering new colonies and expanding your rule and reign and domesticating the wild country. I'm putting air quotes around that, by the way, just so you know. So at this time, Leopold and his father, so before his father's death, he tried to conquer many, many territories to show the Belgians that they were a world power and they were as successful as anyone else. But Leopold's father, so Leopold I, tried 50 different times to conquer new colonies before he died. And he really wanted to prove through colonization that Belgium was a world power, but he failed every single time he tried. But Leopold II decided that he was going to change that track record and he wanted to conquer somewhere, but not necessarily in the name of Belgium. He wanted a territory for himself, so he himself could rule and reign over it. Like I said, he really liked owning things and wanted a nation and people to be his own personal property. So he decided to go with that plan that had been festering and soaking in his head for years, that he needed an African nation to conquer. And he settled on the nation of Congo. As the owner, he would have direct control over all the profits that were made in this country. So it would go straight to him. It wouldn't go to the country of Belgium. It would be his profits. And he couldn't let the other world powers know that that's what he wanted, because there was no way they would let him conquer a territory for his own personal wealth. Absolutely not. So he disguised his plans and his intentions by saying that he wanted to bring the quote-unquote uncivilized people of Africa to Christianity. He wanted to do missionary work, and he wanted to bring these people salvation. And that was his cover. And it worked. In 1884, he met with 14 other European nations at the Berlin Conference. He told those nations that he wanted to spend his own wealth to bring missionaries to Africa because he was so kind and thoughtful like that. He even told them that they were all welcome to come and explore and trade within his new country of the Congo. So, with the knowledge that the Congo was very dangerous, full of lions and hippos and crocodiles and wolves and all kinds of deadly animals, not to mention insects that carried deadly diseases, the other countries were basically like, well, I guess if you want to risk it, sure, go for it, man. It's yours. and we'll be happy to trade with you when that time comes. So in 1879, Leopold sent Henry Morgan Stanley. Oh, guys, this man is the real character, I tell you what. He was an expert on the Congo who had actually lived there for years and had actually tried to convince Queen Victoria to take on the challenge of colonizing the Congo. But she had refused, saying it was too dangerous, it was too much. So Leopold came across his work and decided to send Henry Morgan Stanley to start the colonization process of the Congo. So what Henry Morgan Stanley did is he actually would trick the tribal leaders of the Congo that white men were invincible. For example, he would use contraptions that used battery-powered objects. I don't know how he did this, but they had these battery-powered things that he would put on his hand, and when he would shake the tribal leader's hands, it would increase his grip strength to the point that it would almost make them pass out because it was so strong. And their minds would just be blown, like, how is this man so strong? And he would tell them that white men are so strong, they can pull a tree out of the ground with their bare hands. And he would claim that white men had power over the sun. And how he would prove this is he would take out a cigar and get a magnifying glass and shine it onto the tip of the cigar until it lit. And then he'd say, see, I can tell the sun what I want it to do, and we can burn down your village if we want to. And then, on top of all of those, this is a fun story. He gave an unloaded gun to a native man and told him to fire the gun at him, at Henry Morgan Stanley. So when the young man pulled the trigger, Henry Morgan Stanley dramatically would move around as if he had been shot and acted as if he was dying, and then stand up, kind of shake his leg a little bit, take off his boot, and there would be a bullet in the bottom of his boot. So it looked like the bullet went straight through him. I mean, the natives didn't know that he didn't load the gun. They just knew that this young man had shot a gun at this other man, and the bullet came out of his boot. So he convinced all of the tribal leaders that bullets would just pass through white men because they were spirits that couldn't be killed. And he successfully terrified all the chiefs, scaring them enough into signing a legal contract making King Leopold their ruler and the ruler of Congo. And now, they didn't know what this contract meant. They just signed it because they were terrified. But now all of Europe saw it as a legally binding contract stating that King Leopold II was now the legal ruler over the Congo. Now, to maintain the illusion of what he was actually doing in the Congo, and was trying to convince everyone that what he wanted to do was good and wholesome and amazing, he actually changed the name of the Congo to the Congo Free State. And you will soon see why that title is so ironic, because of the horrible things he has done. Now, I do have to give him some credit here. Leopold did really pay all of the startup money and costs to colonize the Congo straight out of his own pocket. So he was truthful in that when he told everyone that I will take money out of my own pocket to get this started. He did do that. And that's about all the credit that I can give this man. So he would set up governor generals over every different territory within the Congo. Soon, they would discover that the Congo had a large supply of rubber trees. And at this time, car tires and bike tires were starting to get really popular, and they really needed rubber. and they got a lot of the rubber from rubber trees. So when he discovered that Congo was full of rubber trees and had a large supply of them, it was basically like stumbling onto a gold mine. This man had just found the wealth he was searching for. So everyone needed these trees to create rubber, but up until this point, there was a very small supply of that. So Leopold knew that this was going to change his life forever. He was now a wealthy man. Now, how does he actually harvest all of the rubber from these rubber trees? How is he going to do that? He can't really afford to pay people. So what do you think this outstanding citizen who wanted to bring Christianity to the Congolese people, what do you think he did? This man who was against the slave trade, what do you think he did? I'll give you a hint. It's the opposite of being against slave trade. He decided to turn the entire population of the Congo into his own personal slaves. Because like I said before, this man loves owning things. And that apparently includes a whole nation of his own personal slaves. So, to enslave all these people, he had to have each of his governor generals in charge of enslaving their own group of people that they were over. So, each went about it different ways, but most of them, what their chosen method was to burn down the village, so the villagers had no place to hide, then shoot, kidnap, do whatever to the women and children, and threaten to kill these women and children if the men of the village did not do what Leopold wanted them to do, which was bring back 15 kilograms of rubber trees every day. So if they didn't do what they were told, their women and children would be murdered. Now, Leopold II genuinely believed that he owned these people and they were his personal slaves, so he could do whatever he wanted to them. He had no sad feelings or hesitations in treating these people like this. He actually handed out personal bonuses, like individually, to the governor generals that could make the slaves produce more rubber than the other slaves by any means necessary. So as long as they were producing more, Leopold would come and give the governor generals an extra bonus because their slaves were doing more. And at this point in our story, I really want to point something out that's super ironic to me. King Leopold II was actually seen as an anti-slave trade person. I've brought this up a couple times, but he was seen to be so anti-slavery that they actually had the anti-slavery conference in Belgium's capital in 1889. Well, this conference happened while he was turning the entire population of a nation into his own personal slaves. He even gave a presentation to all the nations in attendance on how to stop the slave trade. I'm literally rolling my eyes. How is this possible? This man who claimed to be so anti-slavery had a whole nation of slaves to himself. Mind blown. How could you act one way and behave a different way? I mean, I know I'm asking this question, and we've seen this in many of our horrible humans that we've talked about, but I just still don't understand it. I don't get it. Anyways, I just wanted to point that out because I found it super duper ironic. So in 1888, the Force Publique was established. This was Leopold's own personal military force. And they were assigned to stomp down any resistance to Leopold and what he was doing. And how they actually formed this military force was when they were raiding these villages and burning them to the ground and threatening to kill the women and children, they would handpick the tallest and strongest young men to join this military force. And that is how he established his military force, with force, ironically. Now, the whole reason he set up this armed force was to stamp down any disobedience. Now, these soldiers were told to kill anyone who disobeyed, but because bullets were so expensive, they were instructed to kill with one shot. For every bullet they shot, they were required to bring back one severed hand as proof of their kill. If they failed to do this, they themselves would be killed by their general. This actually meant that they often would cut hands off of men who were still alive anytime they wasted ammunition, because sometimes these military men would hoard ammunition in case they got a chance to rebel at some point. They would even use it to go hunting. So anytime they used any ammunition, they just find an innocent bystander and chop off his hand. And sometimes this would lead to their death because of infection. But they didn't just cut off hands. They would often also cut off things like feet, noses, ears as a punishment. So brutality was a main way to keep everyone in line. While this brutality went on down in the Congo, back in Europe, people had no idea that these atrocities were taking place. In fact, they still thought King Leopold II was spreading Christianity and spreading the message throughout Congo. In 1897, Leopold actually set up what was basically a human zoo on his summer estate. He forced 267 people from the Congo to come to his summer estate. This included children, and set them up in a quote-unquote traditional village for other people, the Belgian people, to come and gawk at them. And the people watching these individuals would throw bananas or peanuts at them, just like they were circus attraction. How horrible. Like, that is so disgusting to me, that you would just treat these people like animals. Many of these people that he brought to his summer estate actually would end up dying of pneumonia or the flu because they were forced to live in the outdoors. Like, this fake village that they set up wouldn't actually let them go inside because he wanted all the people to see them. So he thought this was such a good idea that he actually repeated this at the World Fair that was in Belgium. It was like a human zoo. Oh, it was just disgusting. But people still thought he was this good Christian man trying to spread Christianity throughout the Congo. And because of this false belief that was spreading, word started spreading that he needed more young men and more people to help spread this message. And so he started recruiting young men to help with the quote-unquote Congo mission. And many joined the military to support the effort of colonizing the Congo. Young men from not just Belgium, but Italy, Norway, Sweden, and Denmark all wanted in on this action. They all wanted to help colonize the Congo. And they were taught that the African natives were more like animals and they weren't really fully human. So don't feel guilty if you have to kill one of them if it's necessary. Ugh, it makes me ill to think that anyone would ever think that about another human being. And because they were taught to see them as less, this obviously led to some pretty barbaric behavior from the men. Like, sometimes they would gut people and pull their entrails out of their body. Or they'd slice men's arms off and hang them like trophies. Just because they didn't see them as actual human beings. And the governor generals were actually proud of this kind of behavior, so much so that they would actually write King Leopold II and brag about how many times it was happening and like how amazing it was. They believed that treating these people worse would help them work better. So they were bragging about all of this. And I don't know about you, but being treated horribly and tortured and that kind of stuff doesn't really motivate me to work hard. I don't know. It just doesn't seem to jive with actual psychology. It's just a little out there, torture to make people work harder. Anyways, soon King Leopold II found out that there were actually Arabs starting to encroach upon his rubber tree success, and he didn't like it. They were coming to the Congo to get some rubber trees and get in on that action. He did not like that because right now he had a monopoly over all the rubber trees. He was the one dominating the scene and getting all the money. So he decided that it was time to go to war against the quote unquote slave trading Arabs who, quote, would have actually freed the Congo people. This started the 2-year Congo-Arab War. So he went to war rather than, share in the wealth, and he didn't want to lose his slaves. So they went to war. And in 1895, a man named Charles Stokes, he was actually an English merchant. He was on a mission for the Germans to purchase rubber in the Congo. Now, the Force Republique actually would hang him without a trial. He did nothing wrong. He had just gone down there to purchase some, not to even get involved in the trade and start making money off of it. He was hired to go get rubber, and the Force Republique hung him without a trial, without doing anything wrong. Well, to say Britain and Germany were a little upset would be an understatement, because it would be called the Stokes Affair. Leopold had broken his contract with Germany and with Britain, where he had claimed they would be able to come to the country and free trade as much as possible. He broke that because he killed someone they sent to do free trade with. So Leopold ended up having to pay pretty large fines to both of these countries for violating their treaty of free trade. But this incredibly hefty fine that he had to pay was nothing to Leopold. It was like a drop in a bucket, because he was making a profit of 220 million francs, which, if you translate that into today's money, he would have been making over $1 billion. So the fine he had to pay was nothing. He didn't even care, because he had all the money. He had all the power. Now, to cover his atrocities, Leopold would actually hire some propaganda writers to publish books and articles talking about all the amazing things that were being done for the people of Congo. And these writers were happy to do so. He was such a nice, kind man, but none of them had actually been to the Congo. So they were super happy to write about their righteous king and all of the amazing things that he was doing. They didn't know what was actually happening. Well, unfortunately for King Leopold, reporters from the United States and Great Britain actually began to go to the Congo and report back on what they found. And it was not pretty. In 1890, George Washington Williams, he was an American Civil War vet, went to the Congo and was disgusted at what he found. On July 18th, 1890, he actually wrote an open letter to King Leopold II, sharing all the horrors he had seen while there, and King Leopold II just ignored the letter. Now, I found the letter because I wanted to see for sure what it said, and I'm going to read some quotes to you from this letter. So this is the first one from George Washington Williams. In the letter, he said, "These black soldiers, many of whom are slaves, exercise the power of life and death. They are ignorant and cruel because they do not comprehend the natives. They are imposed upon them by the state. They make no report as to the number of robberies they commit or the number of lives they take. They are only required to subsist upon natives and thus relieve your majesty's government of the cost of feeding them. They are the greatest curse to the country suffers now." So basically, he's saying that the soldiers are just killing people, robbing people, and they're doing it because the majesty's government is not willing to feed them. So they have to feed themselves. So obviously, they're just going to rob and kill. So the next thing he says about some prisoners and some of the slaves is that they have chains around their neck, and he says, quote, "Often these ox chains eat into their necks of the prisoners and produce sores about which the flies circle, aggravating the running wounds. So the prisoner is constantly worried. These poor creatures are frequently beaten with a dried piece of hippopotamus skin called a chicote, and usually the blood flows at every stroke when well laid on. But the cruelties visited upon soldiers and workmen are not to be compared with the sufferings of the poor natives who, upon the slightest pretext, are thrust into wretched prisons here in the upper river. I cannot deal with the dimensions of these prisons in this letter, but will do so in my report to my government." So he's talking about how people are beaten. They have these chains around their necks so long and they just rub so bad that it's just open sores and wounds that flies are festering on. I just have this horrible image in my head. Ugh, it's just horrible. He also talks about in the letter how women are being sold and purchased for, quote, immoral purposes, and that injustices in pay and punishment and participating in slave trade, slave hunting, war on the native people to accumulate more slaves. It just goes on and on and on and on. And then there was this quote. This one got me. "Army officers saw from the deck of their steamer a native in a canoe some distance away. He was not a combatant and was ignorant of the conflict in progress upon the shore some distance away. The officers made a wager of £5 that they would hit the native with their rifles. 3 shots were fired. The native fell dead, pierced through the head, and the trade canoe was transformed into a funeral barge and floated silently down the river." So they would just shoot natives just because they could shoot them. Just make bets on it and see what they could get. And that could be francs, 5 francs. I bet it's 5 francs. But still, they're betting money on human life. It's crazy. And then the last quote I want to read to you from his letter was, "Against the deceit, fraud, robberies, arson, murder, slave raiding, and general policy of cruelty of your majesty's government to the natives stands their record of unexampled patience, long-suffering, and forgiving spirit, which would put boasted civilizations and professed religion of your majesty's government to blush. All the crimes perpetuated in the Congo have been done in your name, and you must answer at the bar of public sentiment for the misgovernment of people whose lives and fortunes were entrusted to you in the August Conference of Berlin." So he calls Leopold out and is like, "You have destroyed these lives, and you need to face justice for what you've done. And the king ignored this letter, obviously, because he's being called out on everything he's doing wrong. And he still has to put up this persona of, I'm an amazing person. I would do nothing wrong. I am fantastic. Now, Edmund Dean Morel, this is a different man who was a clerk from Liverpool. Liverpool, England, to be clear. He suspected that Belgium was using slaves because of the quantity of labor that they were, or quantity of rubber that they were producing. With this suspicion, he actually started investigating on what was happening in the Congo, and what he found horrified him. He actually wrote about it in anonymous articles in the British newspaper called The Speaker, and it was exposing the truth about King Leopold II and what he was doing in the Congo. He said that this was, quote, the greatest crime that has ever been committed in the history of the world, unquote. In 1901, his shipping company actually offered him a really large sum of money to take over all the shipping from the Congo. The catch was he had to stop talking about what was happening in the Congo. He utterly refused and quit his job and became a journalist full-time. So kudos to that guy, like standing up for what he believed in and what was right. So kudos to him. And then another journalist named Roger Casement interviewed people in the Congo to see what was really happening. He wanted to hear from the white Christian missionaries that had been there from the beginning, so they could actually speak on what was really happening and prove to the king and prove to everyone else that the king knew about this. So he talked to these individuals to see, is he actually doing missionary work? Is this really what's happening? Because of his inquiry, it actually forced King Leopold II to conduct his own inquiry, because if he didn't, he knew the information that was going to come out from this inquiry, it would destroy him. So he needed to, again, play nice and pretend like, no, I didn't know about this. I had no idea. I will send my own internal query. So he sent his own international commission to the Congo in hopes that he could actually bribe these people to stay quiet and just, hush it up and make it look like everything was going really well down there. Well, this plan backfired royally on him. In fact, a Christian missionary named John Harris that had lived in the Congo Free State. See how that's ironic? That's the name, the Congo Free State. They're not free. For many, many years, trying to help people. When the International Commission actually arrived on his doorstep asking about what was happening, he gathered a group of Congolese people who would disclose all the information about the death, torture, mutilation, rape, and enslavement of their people. And they said that it was all done in the name of King Leopold and his men. They had all approved it and known about it. And his wife, Alice Harris, was actually a photographer and had happened to capture a lot of photographical evidence of the horrors that were taking place in the Congo. So they couldn't really come back and be like, oh, everything's great. The International Commission submitted a 50-page report detailing the inhumane abuses that had actually been taken place under King Leopold II, and he was forced into a corner. He was finally caught in his lies and wasn't really sure what to do from this point forward. So he actually ordered all state records to be burned, so there would be no evidence of his involvement in the crimes against humanity committed in Congo. How convenient for him. In 1908, Congo became an official colony of Belgium, so it actually was now owned by Belgium, not King Leopold II. So it was actually part of Belgium, part of the country, but it wasn't because it was taken from King Leopold. No. He was never punished for what he did. This wasn't happening because people were like, he needs to be punished. No, do not misunderstand me. They had to purchase it from King Leopold. How much did they have to pay? Oh, just, I don't know, a little bit of 50 million francs to purchase that country to free the people of the Congo from a horrible king. Like, it's crazy. This happened in 1908. It doesn't sound very long ago. I mean, maybe to some of you it seems really, really long ago, but the 1900s weren't that long ago. Now, King Leopold II would die actually a year after he sold Congo to the Belgian people. He died in 1909 and never faced any real consequences for what he did to the people of Congo. He mutilated people, he murdered people, he enslaved people, all while claiming he was anti-slavery, and this incredible person who cared about people's salvation. He just... I don't like liars, and I don't like murderers, and he was both, so I don't like him. We'll be honest, I don't like him. After his death, the government of Belgium actually went down to the Congo. They finally went down there and discovered things that were actually more profitable than rubber trees. They found diamonds and ivory and gold. So the slaves didn't need to work on all these rubber trees anymore because they had diamonds, gold, and ivory. So the government ended slavery and actually paid the people to work instead. And I'm sure it didn't end all the abuses because, back then, work laws weren't a thing. So, but they were no longer slaves. They actually were paid wages for their work. They were not starved and mistreated. Instead of telling the truth to the Belgian people, the government decided that they would just continue to cover this up and not tell people about all the inhumane things that were done and the slavery that happened in Congo. No. They would keep that hidden because King Leopold II was still super popular. People loved him. People thought he was amazing because propaganda. So they didn't want to tell the people, so they just kept up the lie. So there was never a humanitarian issue in the Congo. Slavery didn't exist in the Congo. What are you talking about? They basically would gaslight anyone who would bring up the truth. So when all was said and done, when King Leopold finally ended his horrible reign of Congo, it appears that he was responsible for the death of, get this, 4 to 10 million people. Yes, you heard that right. 4 to 10 million people. This wiped out somewhere between 70 to 90% of the entire population of the Congo. Now just pause, think about that for a second. This man, King Leopold II of Belgium, wiped out 90% of a population of a country. That is insanity. And we don't know for sure how many people were killed under him because they burned all the records. So we don't know the exact number, but that is a pretty good guess. But 90% of a population, 10 million people, that is astounding. And the fact that he did not face retribution for this. Ooh, I know this happens a few times in some of the past episodes that we've talked about, but every time it makes me more and more angry that these people don't face consequences. Well, I'm sure they're facing them now. They're enjoying the heat, we'll say that. Anyways. So Belgium is actually having a really hard time now accepting the truth of King Leopold II because they're still taught, like, it's not really brought up in history lessons. They're still taught that he was a really great leader and that he didn't do what people claim he's doing. But with the internet and the availability of information, it's getting harder and harder to deny what actually happened down in the Congo. So it's slowly getting to the point where people are accepting that, yeah, our leader was kind of garbage and did some really atrocious things to a lot of people. And it's really crazy to me that how little I knew about this man. Like I said, I heard about him, and I heard him as the ruler of Belgium in my graduate program. Granted, we didn't have time to dive deep into every single ruler in every single country because my master's degree was in European history, so it was a lot of information to cover in a short amount of time. So I heard of him, but we never dove deep into what he did, and it just it's so crazy to me because when I heard about him, I was just like, yeah, leader of Belgium, brought a lot of prosperity to his country, period. We didn't talk about how that prosperity came, and now that I know, it's like sickening and disgusting that someone like that had so much power and claimed to be a good Christian. That's what makes me even more mad. Like, dude, why'd you lie about this stuff? Ugh. Because of his inhumane treatment of the people of Congo, the 10 million deaths on his hand, the tortures, the literal mistreatment and inhumane things that he did to people. The phrase crimes against humanity was first used to describe what King Leopold II did to these people. Because of that, King Leopold II of Belgium is our horrible human in history for the week. And join us next week. We are going to talk about an infamous leader whose territory actually spread from the Pacific Ocean all the way to Europe. This individual caused the deaths of over 40 million people. 10% of the entire world's population. So we thought it was crazy. 90% of one country. This person killed off 10% of the entire world's population at the time. Now, we've all heard about this barbaric killer. We have heard some of his tales. Genghis Khan is infamous, and everyone knows his name. But do you actually know his whole story? Do you know the details about his life and how he killed people? Do you know how he spread throughout all of Asia and into Europe? Do you know this story? Because next week, we are going to find the truth about Genghis Khan. So be sure you're liking and subscribing and following me on Instagram so you know when new episodes are coming out. So we can tell you all the crazy, creepy stories about all of these horrible humans in history. In history. Again, my name is Angela Pearson. Thanks for tuning in, guys, and we will see you next week.